Every year, millions of women remain in relationships that slowly drain them of everything they have built. They exist in a state of quiet depletion, tethered to partners who offer nothing but absence. It is a silent epidemic of the heart. Consider the numbers. 47% of women act as the primary financial engine in their households, sacrificing their stability for those who contribute nothing but weight. This is the story of one woman who decided to stop paying that price. Meet Maya. At 28, she is a woman of precision. She maintains a career that demands excellence and manages a life that looks seamless to the outside world. She is the person others rely on to get things done. But when the front door clicks shut and the lights dim, the reality shifts. She enters a space that feels smaller than the one she left. She moves through her home with a deliberate, hushed caution, as if the air itself is heavy with the burden she hides. She is organized, capable, and entirely alone in the very place where she should be safe. Tonight, the silence in the room is not peaceful. It is a physical pressure against her skin, marking the boundary between the life she presents to the world and the one that is currently consuming her. Maya returns from a 12-hour shift, keys clicking against the counter. The house is dim. Derek occupies the center of the sofa, the blue light from his phone flickering across his face. He does not look up. He does not ask about her day. Maya sets her bag down, walks to the desk, and pulls out a stack of envelopes. Red ink marks the due dates. She taps the calculator, her fingers moving with tired efficiency, while Derek shifts his weight to make room for his feet on the coffee table. He is currently using her car to reach his own destinations, yet the insurance notices remain unpaid on the pile. She glances at him, expecting a change, a gesture, an acknowledgement of the work required to keep their lives moving. Instead, he swipes his screen, his expression locked in a shallow digital distraction. He offers promises next week, soon. I have a plan, but the numbers on the page tell a different story. Every bill she pays is a brick in the wall of their imbalance. She stands there, holding the weight of their survival, while he remains entirely unmoored, anchored only by the screen in his palm. The air in the room is stale, thick with the unsaid demands of a partnership that flows in only one direction. The clock on the microwave flickered to 12:47 a.m. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress unyielding beneath her. The house was silent, but it was a brittle, hollow silence that hummed in her ears. She reached for her phone. The screen lit up her face in the dark, showing no new messages. She opened the application, her thumb hovering over the feed. A post from a downtown club appeared. There was Derek, his arm tied around a stranger, his head tilted back in a laugh she had not heard in years. The air in the room seemed to thin. Her pulse thudded against her throat, rhythmic and sharp. She looked down at the nightstand. The bills lay there, a stack of paper demands in her name, all paid by the hours she spent away from home. She stared at the screen again, then back at the ink on the paper. The disconnect was total. The weight she had been carrying for 3 years shifted, turning from a dull ache into a sudden, piercing clarity. She let the phone slide from her hand onto the quilt. She looked at the empty space beside her on the bed, then whispered into the dark, "What am I doing?" The question hung in the air, stripping away the noise. Maya realized she was not just held by a person. She was held by a set of invisible, heavy chains. First, the fear of being alone. She believed the silence of a solitary room would be more punishing than the conflict of a shared life. Second, the myth of financial dependence. She had convinced herself she needed his presence to survive, ignoring the bank statements that proved she was already the sole provider. Third, the sunk cost fallacy. She felt that because she had already sacrificed 3 years, she was obligated to sacrifice the next 3. Fourth, the trap of false hope. She replayed his hollow promises, clinging to the version of him that did not exist. Finally, the loss of her own identity. She had forgotten the hobbies that made her glow and the friends who knew her before the draining began. These were the 5 shadows, the architecture of her imprisonment. She stood up, paced the length of the room, and began to name them aloud. To name the shadow is to begin the process of stepping into the light. If you recognize these patterns, you are not trapped by fate, but by a logic you can dismantle. Dr. Patricia Chen sat across from Maya, her presence steady and direct. She laid out a 10-step framework, a systematic dismantling of the life Maya had endured. The first step was to name the truth without excuses. The second was to envision the future. Maya pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write a letter to the woman she would be in 1 year. She described a life of quiet mornings, a workspace free of tension, and a bank account that belonged to her alone. It felt strange to write down a reality that did not yet exist, but the act itself felt like laying a foundation. Then came the third step, financial independence. Maya opened her laptop and pulled up the statements she had avoided for months. She highlighted every expense, every utility bill, and every debt payment. Her eyes moved across the rows of numbers, and the realization landed with the weight of a physical blow. She was already paying for everything. Every dollar leaked into his lifestyle was money she had earned. She was not a dependent. She was the engine of the entire household. She saved the spreadsheet, closed the lid, and looked around the room. The space felt different now. She was no longer a victim waiting for change. She was the architect of her own exit. Maya waited until he walked through the door. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She laid the printed bank statements on the table, pointed to the total, and stated her decision. "I am leaving," he scoffed, reaching for his phone to record her, then shifted to pleading, then to anger. His words hit the air and dissolved. Maya walked to the closet, pulled her suitcase from the top shelf, and began to fill it. She moved with a mechanical precision, taking only what was hers. Every item she packed was a weight lifted from the floor. She walked out the front door, the lock clicking behind her with a finality that echoed in the quiet street. She climbed into her car, started the engine, and drove until the house was nothing but a memory in the rearview mirror. Once parked in a safe, brightly lit lot, she pulled out her phone. She opened his contact, pressed the red icon, and selected block. She did the same for every social media account. She watched the screen clear, the notifications vanish, and the digital tether snap. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the sound of a new beginning. The new apartment smelled of fresh paint and sunlight. Maya spent the first week simply listening to the silence. It was not the heavy silence of a house held in fear, but a light, open space where she could hear her own thoughts. On a Tuesday, she dragged an old easel from the back of her closet. She set it up by the window, squeezed a glob of blue paint onto the palette, and dragged the brush across the white surface. The first stroke was shaky, but the second was firm. She painted for hours, the rhythm of her hand returning as if it had never left. Sunday mornings were claimed by the yoga mat. She pushed her palms into the floor, stretched toward the ceiling, and held the pose until her muscles burned with a healthy heat. She began to bring the outside in. She carried a heavy bag of soil up the stairs, filling clay pots with ferns and trailing vines. She placed them on the windowsills, watching the leaves stretch toward the morning light. Her home became a living thing, a reflection of the quiet confidence she had cultivated. She walked through her rooms, touched the cool leaves of a plant, and stood before her own painting. She was no longer waiting for permission to exist. She was the one breathing life into her own world. Maya stood by the window watching the city pulse with life below. She looked back at the woman she had been, the one who measured her worth by the silence of a phone, and saw the error of that measurement. She was never the problem. She was never the one who needed to be saved. The burden she had carried for years had not been hers to bear. It was merely a weight she had allowed to settle on her shoulders. She turned away from the glass, her reflection in the pane steady and clear. She had learned that joy is not something found in another person, but something constructed by one's own hands. You are the architect of your own peace. You are worth more than a hollow promise or a late-night text. You are the hero of your own story, and your new life is waiting for you, just on the other side of the word no. Say it, mean it, claim the space that has always been yours. Your path to freedom does not begin with a grand gesture. It begins with the quiet, firm refusal to accept anything less than the life you deserve. The door is open. Walk through it.